What is the state of play in the District of Columbia when it comes to crime and how safe people should feel?
Yeah, excellent question. I think what's really important is that we understand how we got here. So back in 2020, the DC City Council passed a mountain of legislation that was designed to hamstring cops, to shrink the size of the police department, to limit the scope of their responsibilities. And additionally, they passed separate legislation that made it almost impossible to hold criminals accountable. So now 5 years later, after all of that legislation has been enacted, our sworn authorization for the Metropolitan Police Department is 4,000 sworn officers. Right now, we have 3,180. So we have 800 vacancies for the position of sworn police officer. And the way that the department makes up for that gap is through 2 million hours of mandatory overtime, which just exacerbates the burnout and the attrition rate. But even the cops that are out here, they're doing everything they can to get these bad guys off the street. And unfortunately, when they get into the criminal justice system, those same laws that I mentioned earlier make it almost impossible to put these guys in jail in any significant way that addresses the crimes that they've committed.
All right, guys, it is Tuesday. President crushing it out of the gate yesterday with a massive press conference. It went like an hour and a half. Always reminds me of like what a big difference it is, right? How this administration is different. We would barely see President Biden yesterday starting the week off with an hour and 10, 20 minutes presser about everything under the sun. It was pretty unbelievable. Amazing show today headed your way. If you want to understand why this crime thing is so big, sit back, relax, because they're cooking the books. That's the bottom line on this. And you need to understand this because the left keeps talking about crime is down, crime is down. That's just not true. They're lying to you. They're gaslighting you. And the stats aren't real. Greg Pemberton is the chairman of the DC Police Union. He is about to join us to break down everything that's really going on. And by the way, the cops are siding with President Trump, saying that this place is out of control, our nation's capital. The mayor's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I have a security detail, by the way. John Lott will also be here to talk to us about, he is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, about what's really happening. Plus, as an economist by trade, give us the latest on the inflation numbers this morning and where we are with tariffs. By the way, if you do think about this DC, it's not just about DC. If you're sitting somewhere else in the country, this is about a model for the rest of the country to follow, for all these cities that are dealing with crime. It's very personal for President Trump. I know this. He hates the sight of the crime, the graffiti, the homelessness. And I challenge any of these leftists who say it's not a big deal. Okay, here's my challenge to you. Leave your security detail at home and walk any neighborhood in D.C. at night. Pick your neighborhood, walk it. That's right. You won't do it because you're full of it. And these statistics, if you stop counting crime, you decriminalize everything, and then what do you think is going to happen? Of course, the numbers are going to get lower. DC is the case in point. They did this. They literally stopped doing this. And by the way, I mentioned this yesterday. I got to stay on the bandwagon. If you really care about DC, let's get ahead of the game, guys. We control both houses of Congress. Give the Maryland piece of DC back to Maryland to prevent them from making DC a state eventually. That's the thing. The president, by the way, explaining very clearly why he was doing this yesterday, a lesson his father had taught him. Take a look.
Said, you know, my father always used to tell me, I had a wonderful father, very smart, and he used to say, son, when you walk into a restaurant and you see a dirty front door, don't go in, because if the front door is dirty, the kitchen's dirty also. Same thing with the Capitol. If our Capitol's dirty, our whole country is dirty, and they don't respect us. So it's a very good question, actually.
Boom. He did it perfectly there. And a lot of these reporters, by the way, I think recognize this. There was one reporter from ABC that confirmed how, yeah, they get it. They were personally jumped. Another colleague carjacked. They know this. Anyone who lives in D.C., which is what a lot of these reporters do, they know that this is true. But beyond that, there's another stat out this morning. Despite all the experts' gloom and doom, inflation, consumer prices were at 2.7% in July. I'm going to talk to John Lott about that because it's actually a bit misleading itself in that. And our good friend E.J. Antoni, who was here on the show, lots of people saying this, just got selected as the next leader of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Commissioner of Bureau of Labor Statistics. There you go. You're welcome, E.J. Heritage Foundation. This is what happens. You come on the Sean Spicer Show. We got a big show for you tomorrow. John Solomon's going to be here, Robert Cahaly, and the rest of the week. So a lot breaking down. But I'm going to tell you, a lot of the things that happen in D.C. are because of leadership. because of leadership. And the Concerned Women from America are leading the way on our culture war. They were ahead of the issue when it came to trans. They were talking about keeping men out of women's sports. The Concerned Women for America, and we've had Penny Nance on the show before, are literally the leaders in the culture war. They've been at this for like 45 years. And Penny Nance, their current leader, is amazing at what she does. They focus on 7 core issues right now: family, sanctity of life, religious liberty, parental choice and education, fighting sexual exploitation, national sovereignty, support for Israel. I'm telling you, when you hear about the work that Concerned Women for America is doing, and it's just unbelievable. If you're a mom, you know what you're dealing with on a daily basis with your kids. For a donation of $20 or more, you can get a copy of Penny Nance's book and help CWA lead the way on the culture wars, open new chapters around the country. Penny's new book, A Woman's Guide, 7 Rules for Success in Business, is yours if you go to concernedwomen.org/Sean, concernedwomen.org/Sean. You'll get your copy and support a great group that is on the front lines. Thank you for your support of concernedwomen.org. All right. Another great guy that you guys have heard me talk about for years is my buddy Leo Grillo. He's the founder of Delta Rescue. Leo began a journey where he rescued one Doberman. He named the Doberman Delta, which stands for Dedication, Everlasting Love to Animals. And boy, did that kick off a big deal. He then founded Delta Rescue. And if you go to deltarescue.org, just look at the videos for a second. You'll see what I'm talking about, because words don't do it justice. Leo Grillo has founded the world's largest no-kill sanctuary for life. Not a shelter, not a place that they're looking to adopt dogs, cats, horses, whatever. Sanctuary for life. So dogs or cats or horses that are abandoned, malnutrition, abused, neglected, they take them all in. No grants, no big subscriptions, no government this or that. Leo Grillo and Delta Rescue relied solely on our contributions. I made a personal contribution at deltarescue.org, and I ask you to please consider the same. I love the work they're doing. If you're an animal lover, please go to deltarescue.org and join me in making a personal contribution. If you see that estate planning kit and you're moved to help them make this an enduring mission, think about it, talk to your financial planner, but go to deltarescue.org to see what I'm talking about. All right, without further ado, I want to bring in Greg Pemberton. He is the chairman of the D.C. Police Union to talk about the president's efforts yesterday. Greg, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sean, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So I want to get your take on what the president did yesterday, but one of the things that I found interesting is the statement that you guys in the union put out. The mayor saying, I don't think that the president has a full picture of what's going on in D.C. He's overblowing it. The president saying that clearly the mayor doesn't know what's going on in the city. But I look to your statement, and this is what you said. Crime is out of control, and our officers are stretched beyond their limits. The federal intervention is a critical stopgap, but the MPD needs proper staffing and support to thrive. What is the state of play in the District of Columbia when it comes to crime and how safe people should feel?
Yeah, excellent question. I think what's really important is that we understand how we got here. So back in 2020, the DC City Council passed a mountain of legislation that was designed to hamstring cops, to shrink the size of the police department, to limit the scope of their responsibilities. And additionally, they passed separate legislation that made it almost impossible to hold criminals accountable. So now 5 years later, after all of that legislation has been enacted, our sworn authorization for the Metropolitan Police Department is 4,000 sworn officers. Right now, we have 3,180. So we have 800 vacancies for the position of sworn police officer. And the way that the department makes up for that gap is through 2 million hours of mandatory overtime, which just exacerbates the burnout and the attrition rate. But even the cops that are out here, they're doing everything they can to get these bad guys off the street. And unfortunately, when they get into the criminal justice system, those same laws that I mentioned earlier make it almost impossible to put these guys in jail in any significant way that addresses the crimes that they've committed. So, this is the problem that has gotten us here. And the city council has refused to address all of this because they still have these left-leaning ideological politics on anti-police positions. So look, we welcome the feds. If you're going to come in here and you're going to help us get bad guys off the street, you're going to give us the National Guard to give us a presence and give us some eyeballs out in these neighborhoods, that's great. I think our concern here is that it's temporary. Under the statutory authority, the president can only do this for 30 days. And our concern is we're going to get this swath of police officers and National Guardsmen who are going to come in. They're going to help us get crime down. And in a month, they're all going to be on their way doing something else. And the MPD will be left holding the bag without a permanent fix to the underlying problems.
When I was on active duty, I served in a criminal task force. And most of the intel officers were reservists that were cops throughout the country. I stay in touch with almost all of them. And to a T, they all tell me that it's just, these days it's been horrible. No matter what community they live in, they feel hamstrung. That they wanted to be a cop to make their community safer, and they're not being allowed to do their job. It's almost like what the Border Patrol was dealing with under Biden, right? That they're being told, you know what, you arrest the bad guy and they're going to be out the next day. Or so it's almost like, don't bother. Do MPD cops feel that way?
Absolutely. This Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act that I was discussing earlier, it creates liabilities for administrative, civil, and even criminal penalties, even when cops go out and do their job properly. And so now officers who are driving around, as you mentioned, we sign up for this job because we want to go out and protect these neighborhoods. We want to get bad guys off the street. We want to clean these areas up. We don't want to be the police department for a city that has huge crime problems. But getting out of the car and doing what you need to do becomes so much harder when you see your coworkers getting in trouble for doing those very things. And then we even had 2 officers that were maliciously prosecuted for murder, for chasing a guy with a scooter who they believed was armed and was out to commit violent crimes. Luckily, the president came in and pardoned them his first full day in office, and we're thankful for that. But unfortunately, the laws that allowed the system to prosecute those officers are still on the books. And so what we're hoping happens throughout this process is that both the White House and the federal government gets some insight into the problems that exist, because unless we're going to go back and force the city council to undo the policies that put us here, we're going to permanently be in this situation. And we've got to do something to get the staffing levels up to the proper amount so that we can continue to police the city in the way it needs to be policed. And we just cannot do that in the environment that was created by the city council.
Several months back, I'm on my way to a Nats game, and I'm in an Uber going down Independence Ave by the Lincoln Memorial, headed towards the Washington Memorial. And a group of motorcycles comes flying by, and they're all crazy in the street, up and down, doing wheelies, cutting traffic. And my Uber driver says, happens every day. And I go, are you kidding me? He goes, yep. Cops they actually don't want to stop it anymore because they know that they can't do anything. And I said, are you kidding me? Do you see this all he goes, literally once a day. It's just, they know that they're going to get let out, so they almost feel like it's safer to let them do it than to try to pursue them. Is that where we are, that it's just like certain crimes, you got to let them go?
That's right. And the city council has passed laws that prohibit us from chasing those vehicles. So they know that once we get behind them and put the lights on, they can just take off and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, even if we get creative and we corner them at a gas pump or in an alley, or we wait for them to stop the vehicle and we come in and we put handcuffs on them, the only thing they're going to get charged with is a traffic violation. And those traffic violations are prosecuted by a local attorney general named Brian Schwab, who subscribes to this restorative justice model. And he doesn't think that anybody should ever go to jail for anything. And so these guys, not only do they get out immediately, but the worst they get is a $50 ticket. And then on top of that, they can go down to the impound lot and pick up their ATV and go right about doing the same thing. It is a vicious cycle, and there's nothing that can be done about it until the legislation that permits it is changed.
So I want to get your take on something that I believe, which is everyone wants to cite these statistics. Crime is down. And part of my point is, if you stop counting, if you decriminalize all these things that you're talking about, then of course the numbers are going to go down, because you're not arresting them, you're not prosecuting them, they're not going to jail. So if you stop prosecuting X crime, then of course you're going to say that the amount of crime went down because you stopped looking for it.
That's right. Obviously, you've seen the rhetoric over the past few days. Crime is down, which is absolutely not true. And there's a number of reasons why. First of all, one of the things they're doing is they're saying crime's at a 30-year low. And the way that they're coming to that is that they're using a per capita measurement. And 30 years ago, there was only 550,000 residents of the district. Today, there's 750,000. So even though the raw numbers of crimes, of homicides, of robberies, of carjackings have gone up, against the total population, you can make it look like it's gone down. And that's how they're very cutely getting away with that tidbit. But there's other things going on here. There was a local NBC affiliate here that uncovered a story in which one of the police commanders is now under investigation and suspended for allegedly changing the crime stats. He's accused of going into police databases, changing felonies to misdemeanors to keep those crime numbers down. And the response that he's provided publicly is that that's what the pattern of practice is within the command staff, and that all commanders are ordered to do this. And additionally, we know, and
is that true? But my point is not, is this the first time that you heard of it when that NBC station did that, or have you heard about this practice occurring?
Well, there's certainly rhetoric within the department that there's a way that they're manipulating the numbers, but that's the first time that we heard anything substantive, is that this commander was actually being investigated. Listen, I know that commander, and he's a stand-up guy. He's somebody that our members look to for leadership, and he's somebody that has always been trustworthy and appreciated. I don't imagine that's the type of person that went in and maliciously did this to try to get some personal benefit out of it. I think he's right that this is a pattern of practice within the command staff that's coming in order, that's coming from on high to make sure that these crime stats stay down. That's my guess about it. And the reason that I believe that is because, and I know this is anecdotal, but our members are told on the scene of reports to take classifications for lesser offenses. So our members will go to the scene of a robbery, and some management official will show up and say, no, that's a theft. Or we'll go to a carjacking. Nope, that's a stolen auto. Or you go to a stabbing, and they'll say, well, we're not sure if that happened in D.C. or Maryland, so just take an injured person report. And there's all types of games that are played, and that's on the front end. So look, we know that. I mean, the other thing here is that 2023 was one of the most violent years in the past 3 decades. Here in the District of Columbia, we had 297 homicides. We had 960 carjackings. The city was on fire. And so even if we stipulate that crime has gone down some over the past 2 years, which it may have, that's not something to take a victory lap about, is that it's ticked down slightly from a 30-year high. Look, if you work in D.C., you live in D.C., or you travel to D.C., you know that crime exists. It is ubiquitous. It is palpable. It is in every quadrant of the city. All you have to do is walk down any block, and you will feel uncomfortable in a very short period of time. And that's what matters, is, do citizens feel safe? Do they feel like this is a safe city? And can we live here? And frankly, this is the nation's capital. This city belongs to every American, not just the people that live here. And this should be a shining example of our values here in this country. We should not let it turn into a third world hellhole where there's crime on every corner. It's embarrassing.
I agree with you. And it's funny how many people I know that live in Navy Yard. And the transformation of Navy Yard over the last 15 years from sort of where, let's be blunt, that's where a lot of the strip clubs were back in the day. And now you've got some very, very expensive high rises there and condos that are luxury condos. And I will hear over and over again about carjacking, stabbings, robberies, and by like senior government officials where I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. But let me get back to the comment that you made a second ago, Greg. When you say you show up on an incident and they say, well, let's make that a bodily injury versus a stabbing. Is that coming from the police chain of command, say the commissioner down, or is that coming from elected officials?
That's coming from management officials on the department. So, lieutenants, captains, sometimes even a commander of a patrol district. They're very involved in how we're classifying these reports on the scene. And the reason that they're involved is they're trying to find any possible reason why they can take a report for a lesser offense. Oh, the victim's not cooperative, which is not uncommon in some areas of the city. You might have a guy who's shot on the street and there's bullet casings all around him. And you get there, you say, what happened? Nothing. I don't want to talk to you. Well, that's still our job to figure out what happened. We have somebody that shot someone else on the streets of the District of Columbia. Whether or not that victim wants to be cooperative, that's our responsibility. And so our members immediately say, well, look, we need to take a report for an ADW gun. That's a shooting. But then what you'll do is you'll have some captain or some lieutenant that shows up and says, well, he's not cooperative. So, let's just take this injured person to the hospital, which is just an incident report. It's not even a criminal offense. And we'll figure this out later if he wants to talk to the police. And what happens is that shooting now doesn't go on the books. It's not reported in the department stats, and it's not reported to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program.
This is exactly the point. It's easy to say crime is going down when you mitigate it all or don't report it. But if you've had to put things in buckets, so you got the cops, you've got the prosecutors / you mentioned the attorney general there in D.C., and the judges, and then actually let's go to elected officials, the D.C. City Council. Of those four buckets, where is the biggest problem? Is it that the law needs to get changed, the prosecutors need to prosecute, the judges need to judge, or the cops need to do their job? Who bears the most blame?
Deshaun, that is the best question that I've been asked in the past couple of days here. And the answer is this. The criminal justice system here in the District of Columbia is broken. Every aspect of it is broken, whether that's policing, prosecution, judges and trials, sentencing and supervision. All of it is broken. And you can trace every aspect of it back to a piece of legislation that was passed by the council. They have destroyed policing, they have destroyed prosecutions, they have destroyed the way that the courts are allowed to operate, and they've destroyed our ability to sentence criminals to sentences that are commensurate with the crimes they've committed. And so the only way to fix this holistically is to go back and look at all of this legislation that the council passed back in 2020 when there was all of this anti-police rhetoric and work to undo that. I know from my experiences, the DC Council will never do that on their own. And so what we're hoping over the course of the next 30 days is that whether that's the White House, whether that's these federal law enforcement agencies, whether that's Congress, that people get an insight into exactly how the system got so broken, because the only way to fix it is if we can get rid of that legislation. And my main concern is that 30 days are going to go by. All of these folks are going to go up about their merry way, and we're still going to be stuck with all this bad law. So
I will tell you, Greg, this has been a sticking point of the president since I've known him. So I know that you only have 30 days where you can technically control MPD, but he will. I know he cares about this issue personally. So I believe you'll get the continued support. Jeanine Pirro yesterday in that White House press conference teased the problem of young people. And as I mentioned, some of these gangs go down to Navy Yard or whatever. It's young kids that are under 18 and she can't go after them. How big of an issue are young gang members, young kids, young hooligans, whatever you want to call them?
Well, it's a huge problem because, as I mentioned earlier, we have two prosecutors in the city. We have Jeanine Pirro, who prosecutes adult crimes, and we have Brian Schwab, who's a locally elected prosecutor who prosecutes juvenile crime. And his philosophy is restorative justice. Nobody ever goes to jail for anything. And these kids know that, which is why they're so willing to go out and commit even violent and heinous acts, because even if they're caught, there's no penalty for them. Even if they're caught and convicted, there's no penalty for them. Jeanine Pirro was absolutely right when she said these kids get yoga and arts and crafts. That's exactly the solution that Brian Schwab prescribes when kids get, even when they're murdering people. It really is an awful situation, and a lot needs to change. And I'm hoping that these folks involved, I'm very optimistic that there's going to be some real changes here.
I just remember growing up, like the thought of getting arrested is what was the massive deterrent. Because it'd be like on your permanent record. And now these kids are basically being told, hey, don't worry, it'll never go on your permanent record. Greg, before you leave, I want to use this opportunity to address a personal pet peeve of mine and get your take, because I just need to know if it's true or false. In the District of Columbia, if I sit out at Freedom Plaza, 14th and Constitution right there by the White House, and I'm drinking a bottle of bourbon or a beer in the open, is that against the law in D.C.?
It is. It's possession of open container of alcohol and is an arrestable offense.
Okay. Then why is it that I walk around D.C., and it's not D.C. unique, it's New York, whatever, and people can smoke pot? How come you can't drink alcohol, but you can walk around and smoke pot? I just don't understand how one's legal and one's, or just, you know.
Well, smoking marijuana in public is also illegal. It is what we would call a notice of infraction. A ticket could be issued to those people. I can't remember the cost of that ticket. I think it's like $250 or something. But the problem is when you're short 800 police officers, having police officers that are dedicated to go around and stopping people who are smoking marijuana and issuing them tickets, which might take 20 or 30 minutes, just becomes impossible. I mean, we're just running call to call to call to call.
No, I get it. And that's why I appreciate, like I said, you guys are stretched thin. I've talked to a bunch of your officers at public events. They're great people. They're doing the Lord's work to keep the city safe. But it's just a personal thing to me where I don't understand. And again, that's not on you guys. That's just, to me, the law, where it's silly. It's like if you can't drink a beer in public because you're afraid of, then we let people just sit there and all over the city. And it's not just, it's Alexandria, it's Arlington. And so it's not unique to DC. It's just a pet peeve of mine where I'm like, I can't believe that we go after people for public intoxication, but you can get high as a kite and nothing happens.
it is frustrating. It's not good for tourism either. You have families walking through clouds of marijuana smoke. It's not something that you want to bring home. So look, I wish we had more enforcement in that area. And frankly, if we had the right number of cops, not only would violent crime be down, but we'd be able to address those same quality of life violations and try to clean up the city even more.
All right, I'll tell the president to add that to the list. Greg Pemberton, thank you for everything that you and the folks at the D.C. Police Department, the Metropolitan PD, are doing to keep the people who are visitors, who are tourists, who are permanent residents there safe and secure. I appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Sean, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
You bet. Great conversation with Greg. Now I want to bring in John Lott. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center to break down how this really matters to us. Plus, because he's an economist, he can break down the new inflation numbers and what the tariffs are doing for our economy. John, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, I was thinking about it in advance of talking to you. If let's just say you're in Montana watching the show today, or California, and you're saying to yourself, do I really care about what's going on in D.C.? Like, why is what the president did yesterday important to somebody who doesn't live here, doesn't have a trip scheduled here? Why should they care?
Well, I mean, I think we care about other Americans just in general. And given the how high DC's crime rates are relative to other places in the country. I mean, their violent crime rate is more than twice as high as the violent crime rate in California as a whole. I don't know how many times higher than Montana, but I'm sure it's even more than that. And you go back to 2023, the last year that we have kind of full data from the FBI, final data. DC had the fifth highest murder rate of any of the 60 most populous cities in the United States. People talk about the drop in crime over the last few years, and that's true. But you look at something like carjackings, which the president concentrated on. It had reached like 969 in 2023, and it's down to about 496 now. But that's still 5 times higher than it was in 2017 or 2018. Things by any reasonable measure are out of control. And people, if you care about other people, if you care about their lives, why do you want to see kind of places devolve into third world type areas?
Do you also, I get that the legalities of what the president is doing is very different because it's Washington, D.C. It's a federal district. He has control of the National Guard. But I was thinking about it from the context of, if I live in St. Louis or New Orleans or San Diego or L.A., I might say to myself, I don't know, I'm looking at it like the border, right? In the sense that we were gaslit for a long time and told there's nothing we can do here. It's not as bad as you can believe. And yet Donald Trump showed us clearly on day one of his presidency that was not true. And my thought was, if we can show that D.C. can be made safe again, then if you live in L.A. Or St. Louis or Minneapolis, that you would say, excuse me, local leaders, we don't have to put up with this. Look what the president showed us in Washington, D.C.
I think you're exactly right. Look, this isn't rocket science here. The way you reduce violent crime, is by making it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. Higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences that are there. If you look at the number of patrol officers that they have in D.C., they have like 1,300 patrol officers. Obviously, not all of them are going to be on duty at any point in time. Let's say you have 450, a third that are on duty at any point in time. They have 720,000 people that they have to go and protect. You look at the U.S. attorney during the Biden administration. In 2022, he declined to prosecute 67% of arrests. Even in 2023, he declined to prosecute over 55% of the arrests that were occurring there. That's not how you make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime. Judge Jeanine yesterday in her statements was talking about, hopefully changing the law so that she could go after more of the criminals there in D.C. than she's able to do. But she's changed it obviously dramatically already from what was there before. But there are other things. You bring up the border. One of the reasons why I think that violent crime is falling nationally is because of the changed policies that Trump has had. Not only are they going and trying to deport illegal aliens who have criminal records, but the very fact that even the people that they haven't been able to catch yet have had an incentive to keep their heads down. I mean, they know if they get arrested, they're going to get deported. And so what's one way to try to stay off police radar? And that is to go and not commit crimes right now. So I think, Trump is showing in many different ways whether or not they make a connection on something like the illegal aliens or not, and the national drop that we've been seeing in crime, is a question. But look, you're exactly right. Hopefully within a month, which is the 30-day window that Trump has there, we'll begin to see a dramatic change that's there. My guess is a lot of criminals might say, we may have gone over and just beat up somebody a couple days ago in a carjacking with the Doge guy. But if we go do that now, maybe there's an FBI agent that's nearby that's going to be able to go and get us. Or maybe the police are going to be more proactive. And so, if you see a dramatic change that occurs there, hopefully people around the country will realize, look, it's not that complicated. Just like closing the border was a lot less complicated than people thought it might be or were claiming. They're going to say, saving lives. The one last point is Democrats claim that they care about the poor, that they care about the minorities in the country. Who do you think are the main victims of these violent crimes in these urban areas? If they really cared about these people, they would be in the vanguard to go and say, we got to go and make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime rather than going and trying to make life easier for criminals.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think the signal that you send matters. And that's what I think you're getting at. And during the Biden administration, right? You remember Kamala Harris famously said, when asked what her message was, she said, don't come. But then it was almost like, don't come, but I'm going to wink at you and say, but if you do come, here's what all of the prizes you get: a free hotel, a gift card, phones, right? And so if and you and I both know this, I don't know your driving skills, but I'll just make an assumption that, I know that there are certain roads that might say posted speed limit 25, but it's never enforced, right? So I can get away with it. And I think what happens in D.C. and what had happened at the border is that people knew, if I break this law, it's not going to matter, right? In downtown D.C., if I talk to a cop, they're not going to come after me. To your point, they're getting away with things. And if the converse is true, if they know, if I do that carjacking, if I break into that CVS, I'm going to be arrested, I will be prosecuted, then it will serve as a deterrent. It's a signal. It's the same thing with our border. As soon as Trump said it's closed and we're going to deport, one of the things that I think is interesting to me is, and it's completely over the heads of the morons in the national media, is that when you start telling people you're going to deport them to El Salvador, send them to Alcatraz, Alligator Alcatraz, they say, God, I don't want to get caught, because I should just self-deport, because I certainly don't want to end up with that. It's the signal that matters almost as much as anything else, John. And I feel like that's what you were touching on, where if we can start to say, when you go down that street in D.C. now, if I know I'm going to get caught and prosecuted, I might go hunting somewhere else.
Right. No, you're exactly right. Look, I'm an economist, and one of the basic tenets of economics is that if the price goes up for something, people buy less of it. If the price of apples go up, people buy fewer apples. If the cost of criminals committing crime, or the perceived cost of criminals committing crime goes up, they're going to commit less crime. It's not a difficult idea. Anybody who's had kids knows that if you go and you tell them that there are going to be consequences for their actions, they're going to be less likely to go and cause the trouble that you're telling them not to go and do. So I couldn't agree with you more on those things. And I think Trump is educating people in a way that I think few presidents have ever tried to educate people.
You know, you mentioned you're an economist by training, so you deal a lot in stats. And you mentioned the data early on about crime. And
Right.
I got to ask you, as a guy who deals in this, do you believe the data that the FBI is putting out right now? Because I've made it clear, just so that I'm clear with you, I don't believe it. Because I think that when you stop counting things, when you stop arresting people, when you stop prosecuting people, of course it's going to look like crime is falling. But it's just
Right.
that you're not actually capturing it anymore. So is the model flawed?
You know, you're exactly right. In fact, I kind of tried to bring this to national attention last year. Look, we have two different measures that we have of crime. One is the FBI data on crimes reported to police, and that's what the data that people point to in DC that we've been talking about. And the other one is total crime. And what you have to understand, and that's from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, their National Crime Victimization Survey. What you have to understand is that only about 40% of violent crime is reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. Prior to COVID, you generally had those two measures of total crime, which is what we really should care the most about, and reported crime were moving up and down together. But since COVID, they've been kind of going in opposite directions in many different years. And it's precisely for the reasons that you're saying. We've known for many decades whether or not people report crime to the police depends in part on whether they think the police are going to do anything about it.
Right.
Okay. If you don't, so like in 2022, the arrest rate for violent crimes and reported violent crimes in cities over 1 million was down to 20%. That's just mind-boggling that it can be so low. And that's just for reported crimes. When you look at for total crimes, it was down to like 8%. The arrest rate for property crimes, for total property crimes in those large cities was 1% for property crimes. And so, people have to ask themselves, is it worth their time to go and report those types of things to the police? And if it's not worth their time, you're going to have a gap that's going to be occurring there between, and I don't know, we don't have the data broken down like that for DC, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something like that occurring there too. And also, it's become more difficult over the last few years to report crimes to the police. In part, that's because the drop in the number of police officers that we've had in many parts of the country. But 6 years ago, if you had called up 911, they would have sent out a police car and a crime would have been written down being reported by the police. Now, in many parts of the country, if you call up, they'll ask you, is the criminal still there committing the crime? And people virtually always say, no, they've already left. And then the operator will say, well, you can come down to the police station and wait in line and fill out a police report. And so there are going to be some people who are going to say, I would have had a police report done 6 years ago, but now I'm not sure it's worth my time. You don't need everybody to do that, but even if some people do that, you're going to begin to create this gap between the number of crimes out there and the number of crimes that are recorded as being committed. And so your point's exactly right on.
I want to pivot for a second to the economy because of your expertise. This morning we saw this inflation report come out, 2.7% in July. John, I keep saying this over and over again. The experts suck. I keep hearing it's almost like they're cheering for higher inflation and bad job reports. But the expectation this morning was that we're finally going to see the effects of Trump's tariffs. Inflation was going to rise. And we didn't. And the immediate reaction from the so-called experts is, well, we'll probably see it next month then. What do you think's going on?
Well, a couple of things, just kind of understanding the data. If you go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, the way the media would report these numbers is they would take the monthly rate that you have right now and extrapolate that out for the rest of the year. Right now, for this month, it was 0.2%. So that's an annual rate of 2.4. The 2.7 that you have there is what it's been over the last year. So that includes some of the numbers from the Biden administration that's there. And I'm not sure, to me, like maybe you just don't want the last month, but maybe the last few months or something like that. You look at the GDP, when the GDP was released, it was estimating that for that quarter, inflation was 2.1%. But look, I'm kind of a Milton Friedman type economist. I believe that inflation is essentially a monetary phenomenon. If the Fed's going and buying up lots of bonds and injecting money into the economy, that goes and causes inflation. If you have some prices go up because of tariffs or something like that, and you're not changing the money supply, other prices are going to fall. And you're not going to have overall inflation that's going to be occurring there. Will you create some distortions there? Yeah, sure you will. But that's different than going and talking about inflation occurring. And so, it's basically up to the Fed to determine. It's not just the interest rate, too. The interest rate stuff is only a small portion of the changes that they have in the money supply. They have to make a decision about how many bonds they're going to buy or sell. And they made the decision during the Biden administration to kind of monetize a lot of the debt that's there by going and massively buying up bonds and injecting cash into the system, which is what caused the inflation there. But tariffs aren't going to cause inflation any more than if the price of oil went up. If money supply stayed the same, then other prices would go down to balance that off.
Okay, so walk us through that, because you listen to a lot of, again, these so-called experts, and they're saying these tariffs are inflationary. The president was out truthing today saying, we're bringing in a ton of money to the Treasury because of the tariffs, and the economy's humming along. I know you've been very outspoken on this. Explain why the experts are wrong on tariffs and the impact that they are having on the economy.
Okay, look, tariffs, do they kind of reduce trade? Yes, they do. Do they go and hurt consumers? Yes. Do they go and reduce growth? Yes. But the thing is, what people aren't talking about is that's true for all taxes. If you have sales taxes, there are going to be trades that aren't going to be occurring. If you have income taxes, that reduces the amount of work people do or investments that they're going to make. The same with corporate taxes that will reduce output that you're going to be having there, or reduce investment. And so the question becomes, as an economist, so what Trump's often talked about, and what I kind of viewed the big, beautiful bill as being part of, is they raised, he's raising tariffs at the same time that they're cutting other tax rates that are there. And, you look at something like the income tax. If you add up the federal top rate plus the top rate across states, you're talking about an average top rate of about 43%. For the corporate income tax across states and the federal government, you're talking about an average rate of about 27%. The tariff that we had prior to Trump was 2.5%. And what you have to understand is that the size of the distortion increases at an increasing rate with the level of taxes. So if I have a 20% tax, I'm going to get more than twice the distortion that I would have had for a 10% tax. Now, I don't know what the right tariff is, whether it's 15% as the agreement that they've been having with Japan and the EU or something, or if it's 10%. But I'm pretty sure that 2.5% is low relative to the rates that we have for income and corporate taxes that are there. And so, to the extent that you can balance these things off, I think the corporate income tax is particularly a pernicious tax, basically because it creates double taxation of the earnings for the companies that are there. Trump during the campaign talked about cutting the corporate income tax down to 15%. I guarantee, one of the big reasons why we had the boom during his first administration was cutting the federal corporate income tax from 34% down to 21%. That created investment from around the world. That investment made workers more productive and increased the productivity for workers, and therefore increased their wages that were there. And, because the amount that companies are going to pay workers depends upon how much they're adding to the value of the company's output, how much productivity that they're having. You go and invest more in workers, you're going to get more productivity. So, but in any case, there's a number of places that they've cut the effective marginal income tax rate in the big, beautiful bill. They've cut other taxes. And so I think the economists, so many economists, they'll just go and say tariffs interfere with trade. And that's true. Okay. But all taxes do that. And for some reason, there's this disconnect that these other economists have between recognizing that basic point and looking at the level of these different taxes and trying to figure out how we kind of minimize the distortions across all the taxes that are there.
So the president was obviously venting again this morning about Jerome Powell, calling he's too late Powell. To your point on all of this, should the president fire Powell and insist on a chairman who will cut interest rates, because it would do the opposite of kind of what you were saying the tariffs would do? It would increase, theoretically, trade and investment, et cetera. So is that a sound strategy? Would you, if he asked you, John Lott, hey, I'm trying to figure out whether to fire too late Powell, would you say go for it, Mr. President, or let's see what he does in September?
Well, look, I think Powell has completely mucked it up in many different ways. I blame, our earlier discussion, I blame him much more than almost anybody else for the inflation that occurred during the Biden administration. It's because they made the decision that they were going to go and buy a lot of bonds. And when the Fed buys bonds, they're essentially printing up money in order to go and buy the bonds that they have out there. And, I think in part, Trump criticizing him has caused him to kind of put his back up and maybe even being less likely than he might have otherwise been in terms of lowering the interest rates. I think he's just obstinate in terms of that, best I can tell him. I don't know the guy personally. I know people who know him. But, I think there's a value to having an independent Fed. I don't think you want to go and set up the precedent that presidents will go and do that, because even though Trump might be right on a lot of these things, I'm not sure that there are other presidents who are going to be kind of as right on these types of things. I mean, you look at what happened during Jimmy Carter's administration, for example. And so I guess I'm reticent to do that, but I don't think it hurts at the same time to go and do what President Trump does very well many times, and that is going out there and educating people. Now, I wouldn't make it personal in terms of going after Powell, okay, because I think you just get him to kind of put his back up and just be obstinate in terms of making it clear that he's not going to give in to the political pressure that's there. But I would go and explain to people, the implications of Powell's behavior, and I would go and make it clear that I blame Powell for the inflation that occurred over the recent years that were there, and that Powell should take responsibility for that. And maybe, those types of things, if you could educate people on that, it might cow Powell into going and doing the right things at other times.
Hope so. John Lott, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no, I love listening to you guys on the morning meetings and stuff like that. So,
oh, good.
You're having me on. Thank you.
You bet. Take care. Guys, thanks for tuning in. A great show. Brand new column drops today at SeanSpicer.com. As I mentioned, tomorrow, John Solomon. Friday, Robert Cahaley. Big week ahead. Hit that subscription notification button, and we'll see you back here tomorrow night. Thank you. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.